Have you ever noticed how the more available you become, the less they seem to care? And have you ever sat alone staring at your phone, asking yourself why someone who says they need space somehow has no problem taking all of yours? Stay with me until the end, because if you truly understand what this pattern is doing to your mind, your self-worth, and your emotional energy, you will never beg for crumbs of attention again. And once that shift happens, the power comes back to you. There is a pain that almost nobody talks about. It is not the pain of losing someone overnight. It is worse than that. It is the pain of slowly disappearing inside a connection while the other person keeps drifting away. You answer fast. You make time. You show patience. You become understanding. You try not to be too much. You try not to ask for too much. You tell yourself to stay calm, stay soft, stay supportive. And deep down, you believe that if you just love them the right way, they will finally feel safe enough to stay. But instead of bringing them closer, your effort starts making you feel smaller. And that is where the damage begins. At first, you do not even notice it. It happens quietly. You start checking your phone more than usual. You start replaying conversations in your head. You start reading into every delayed reply, every cold message, every sudden change in tone. You become hyper aware of them while they become less aware of you. And this is where psychology starts to trap you, because the human mind does not only get attached to love, it gets attached to uncertainty. It gets attached to inconsistency. It gets addicted to the hope that maybe this time things will be different. So every time they pull away and then come back, your heart starts treating their attention like a reward. And before you realize it, you are no longer just loving them. You are emotionally depending on moments that should have been basic in the first place. That is why you stay longer than you should. That is why you keep making excuses for behavior that keeps hurting you. You tell yourself they are just overwhelmed. You tell yourself they are just scared. You tell yourself they have been through a lot. And maybe all of that is true. But here is the part that breaks people. Understanding someone's pain does not protect you from becoming the victim of their patterns. You can have compassion for someone and still be slowly destroyed by the way they love. And too many people confuse empathy with emotional self-abandonment. They think being loyal means tolerating emotional starvation. They think being patient means staying available while someone keeps giving them less and less. So you keep showing up. You keep being the one who texts first. You keep being the one who asks if everything is okay. You keep being the one who lowers your standards just to keep the connection alive, and little by little you begin to train your own nervous system to survive on almost nothing. A delayed message feels normal. Mixed signals feel normal. Emotional distance feels normal. Anxiety becomes your routine. Waiting becomes your routine. Doubting yourself becomes your routine. And the most dangerous part is this. After a while, you stop asking whether they are right for you, and you start asking whether you are enough for them. That is where your identity begins to collapse. Because once you start measuring your worth by someone else's emotional availability, you lose touch with your own value. You start thinking your love is the problem. Your needs are the problem. Your feelings are the problem. You begin to shrink your voice so you do not push them away. You silence your pain so you do not create pressure. You pretend to be okay with things that are breaking your heart because you are terrified that if you finally speak up, they will leave for good. And now look at what has happened. You are no longer being loved. You are managing someone else's comfort at the cost of your own peace. That is not connection. That is survival. And survival love is one of the most painful things a human being can experience because it forces you to perform calmness while chaos is growing inside you. It forces you to smile while your mind is full of questions. It forces you to act low maintenance while your heart is starving for consistency. You become emotionally available to someone who is emotionally unavailable to you. And then one day, you wake up exhausted, not because you loved too deeply, but because you kept pouring into a space that was never built to hold you properly. This is what many people never understand until it is too late. When you are always available to someone who keeps withdrawing, your availability stops feeling special. It stops carrying weight. It stops being felt, not because your presence has no value, but because human beings often stop respecting what they never have to work to keep. Read that again in your mind. People often stop respecting what they never have to work to keep. And if you are constantly there, no matter how little they give, what message does that send to their subconscious? It says, no matter how distant I become, no matter how little effort I make, they will still be here. That is the silent message you send every time you abandon yourself to avoid losing someone else. And this is not about blame. This is about awakening, because many good-hearted people were never taught that overgiving can become self-betrayal. They were taught to be loyal, to be patient, to be forgiving, to understand, to hold on. But nobody taught them that love without boundaries can become a slow form of self-destruction. Nobody taught them that being constantly available to the wrong person does not make you lovable. It makes you easier to overlook, and that truth hurts. But it also frees you, because once you finally see what has been happening, you stop romanticizing your suffering. You stop calling emotional neglect a complicated connection. You stop calling your anxiety deep love. You stop calling their inconsistency potential, and you begin to understand something powerful. Just because you can handle pain does not mean you were meant to live in it. So if you have been the one who always stayed, always waited, always understood, always made excuses, hear this clearly. Your heart was never weak. Your love was never too much. But your constant availability may have been teaching the wrong person that they could keep receiving your energy without ever truly valuing your presence. And if that truth stings, good. Because some truths are painful only because they are the beginning of your freedom. What makes this even more painful is that most people never realize they are trapped in a pattern. They think they are just dealing with a difficult person. They think they are simply in love with someone who needs time. But what is really happening is much deeper than that. This is not only about romance. This is about nervous systems, emotional conditioning, and the hidden rules people carry inside them without even knowing it. And once you understand those hidden rules, you stop blaming yourself for a game that was never built for healthy closeness. Avoidant people are often not moved by love the way secure people are. They are moved by distance. They are moved by relief. They feel calm when nobody asks too much from them emotionally. So when somebody genuinely shows up with warmth, consistency, and emotional openness, it does not always feel comforting to them. Sometimes it feels heavy. Sometimes it feels threatening. Sometimes it wakes up a fear they have spent years trying to escape. A fear of being needed. A fear of being trapped. A fear of losing control. So instead of leaning into the bond, they step back from it. Not because you are worthless, not because you failed, but because closeness touches wounds they do not know how to handle. That is why your kindness can be misunderstood. Your effort can be misread. Your love can be experienced as pressure, even when your intentions are pure. And if you do not understand this, you will spend months or even years trying to become easier to love. You will start editing yourself. You will become quieter, more careful, more emotionally restrained. You will begin walking on eggshells inside your own connection, trying to avoid anything that might make them shut down. And in that process, something dangerous happens. You stop being yourself. You become a version of you built for their comfort, not your truth. This is where psychology becomes brutal. The human brain is wired to chase resolution. When something feels unfinished, the mind keeps returning to it. That is why avoidant dynamics are so addictive. You are not only attached to the person, you are attached to the unfinished emotional loop. You want clarity. You want certainty. You want the warmth they gave in the beginning to come back and stay. So your mind starts working overtime, trying to solve them like a puzzle. You search for hidden meaning in every word. You overanalyze silence. You look for signs that they still care. And every small moment of attention starts feeling bigger than it should because your brain has been deprived of consistency for so long that even the smallest emotional crumbs begin to feel like proof of love. But crumbs are not love. Read that in your heart, not just your mind. Crumbs are not love. Rare effort is not devotion. Confusion is not chemistry, and emotional distance is not depth. Too many people stay because they confuse intensity with intimacy. They believe that if a connection hurts this much, it must mean it matters. But pain is not proof. Suffering is not a soulmate sign. Anxiety is not a sacred bond. Sometimes it is just your nervous system reacting to instability and calling it passion, because it has forgotten what peace feels like. And this is why being constantly available can quietly destroy your power. When you are always there, always reaching, always trying to fix what they break, you remove the one thing that could ever force truth into the open: emotional contrast. If they know you will always remain, they never have to face what your absence means. If they know you will always return, they never have to question their behavior. If they know you will always understand, they never have to grow. Your endless access becomes their emotional escape. And they may not even do it consciously. But the result is still the same. They stay comfortable while you stay confused. There is a hard truth here that many people avoid because it cuts straight to the ego. Sometimes the more you give, the less you are felt. Not because giving is wrong, but because value is often recognized through contrast, not constant availability. Human beings are deeply reactive creatures. We often do not notice the weight of something until it shifts. We do not realize the depth of someone's presence until it is no longer guaranteed. And when someone has an avoidant pattern, this becomes even stronger. Predictable emotional access can make them numb. Space wakes up awareness. That is why chasing never creates safety. It creates imbalance. One person becomes the emotional provider. The other becomes the emotional controller. One is full of questions. The other has all the power to answer or ignore. One waits, the other decides. One overthinks. The other keeps distance. And the longer this continues, the more your self-respect begins to leak out through tiny daily moments. The extra message you should not have sent, the apology you gave for simply having needs, the silence you tolerated when you deserved honesty, the energy you handed over hoping it would finally make them choose you fully. But nobody can choose you properly while you are busy abandoning yourself to be chosen. That is the shift. That is the truth so many people need to hear. The issue was never that you cared. The issue was where you kept placing that care into someone who had not built the inner capacity to receive healthy closeness without turning it into distance. And if you do not understand that, you will keep trying to solve emotional unavailability with more emotional labor. You will keep believing that if you just love harder, stay softer, and ask for less, things will finally change. But patterns do not break because one person suffers more. Patterns break when one person stops participating in what keeps them alive. And that is where your awakening begins. Not in revenge, not in pride, not in becoming cold, but in seeing clearly. In realizing that your constant effort may have been feeding a cycle that was draining your spirit. In understanding that your availability was not being cherished. It was being expected. And there is a huge difference between being appreciated and being assumed. Appreciation feels warm. Assumption feels invisible. Appreciation makes you feel seen. Assumption makes you feel replaceable. And nobody heals by staying in a space where their heart is treated like a convenience. So if you have been asking yourself why they only seem interested when you pull back, why they seem warmer when you become quieter, why they act more curious when you stop trying so hard, the answer is not because your love had no value. The answer is because some people only become aware of what they have when it is no longer constantly available to regulate their comfort. That does not make you powerless. It means you have been using your power in the wrong direction. And once you turn that energy back toward yourself, everything begins to change. And this is the moment most people are afraid of. The moment they stop reaching. The moment they stop chasing the reply, the reassurance, the small sign, the little piece of warmth that kept them emotionally attached. Because for a long time, effort felt like control. Trying felt like hope. Staying engaged felt safer than stepping back. But the truth is, the second you stop forcing access to someone who keeps moving away, you begin to see reality with painful clarity, and clarity can hurt before it heals. At first it feels unnatural. Your hands want to text, your mind wants to check, your heart wants to break the silence just to feel connected again. That is not weakness. That is emotional conditioning. When your mind has been trained to depend on random moments of attention, distance feels like withdrawal. It feels uncomfortable because your system has learned to survive on inconsistency. So when you finally stop feeding the cycle, part of you panics. Part of you starts whispering, what if this pushes them away forever? But what you need to ask instead is something much more honest. Why was I the only one holding this together in the first place? That question changes everything. Because once you stop being available all the time, you begin to notice who was only enjoying access and who was truly invested. You begin to notice who only leaned in when you were slipping away and who stayed steady without needing to be chased. You begin to notice how much of the connection was being carried by your anxiety, your effort, your patience, your silence, your emotional labor. And when that becomes visible, it is impossible to unsee. What once felt like almost love starts to reveal itself as emotional dependence mixed with hope. This is where your power begins returning, not because you are trying to make them react, but because you are finally stepping out of a role that was exhausting your soul. You stop checking your phone every few minutes. You stop making them the center of your emotional world. You stop building your whole mood around whether they are warm or cold that day. And little by little, something incredible starts happening. The energy you were losing every day starts coming back. The mental noise starts getting quieter. The emotional fog begins to clear. And for the first time in a long time, you can actually hear yourself again. That is the real shift. Not whether they notice, not whether they come back, not whether they suddenly change. The real shift is that you begin to remember your own presence. You begin to feel your own life again. Your mind is no longer chained to their inconsistency. Your worth is no longer tied to whether they choose to show up. And that changes the way you carry yourself. You speak differently. You think differently. You move differently. There is less desperation in your energy, less fear in your decisions, less emotional begging hidden behind understanding. And here is what human psychology reveals in these moments. When access is no longer guaranteed, attention often rises. That is when avoidant people sometimes begin to notice what they had been taking for granted. The silence they once enjoyed starts feeling louder. The emotional safety they quietly depended on starts feeling absent. The certainty of your presence is no longer there to calm their inner distance. And suddenly they feel the gap. They feel the missing energy. They feel the change in the dynamic, not because you played a game, but because the balance has shifted. And this is where many people make a mistake. The second they sense the avoidant pulling closer again, they rush right back into the same pattern. They become available too quickly. They reopen the door without asking what has actually changed. They mistake attention for growth. They mistake curiosity for commitment. They mistake temporary effort for emotional maturity. And then the cycle begins all over again. A little closeness, a little hope, a little warmth, then distance, then confusion, then pain. That is why pulling back is not enough on its own. What matters is what you become while you are stepping back. If you are only becoming distant to get a reaction, you are still emotionally trapped. But if you are stepping away to rebuild your center, your standards, your self-trust, then something much deeper begins to happen. You stop seeing your space as a tactic. You start seeing it as protection. You stop seeing your silence as loss. You start seeing it as peace. You stop seeing their inconsistency as a mystery. You start seeing it as information, and information is freedom. Because now, instead of asking, how do I make them stay? You begin asking, why was I settling for so little? Instead of asking, what if they leave? You begin asking, why was I so willing to stay in something that kept hurting me? Instead of focusing on how to become more lovable to them, you begin focusing on how to become more honest with yourself. And that honesty is where healing begins, not fake healing, not temporary confidence, real healing, the kind that makes you stop chasing people who only value your absence after disrespecting your presence. You start realizing that the version of you who was always available was not more loving. It was more afraid. Afraid of losing the connection, afraid of being forgotten, afraid that if you stopped trying, everything would collapse. But if something only survives because you are overextending yourself, then it was already collapsing. You were just the one holding the broken pieces together with your own emotional energy. And no one can keep doing that forever without losing themselves. This is why choosing distance from the wrong dynamic can feel so powerful. It teaches you that your peace is not found in being chosen by someone emotionally unavailable. Your peace is found in no longer needing to fight for what should come naturally. Your calm is found in no longer proving your value to someone who only responds when they feel your absence. Your strength is found in becoming unavailable to anything that keeps making you betray your own needs just to stay connected. And once that inner shift happens, people feel it. Not only avoidance, everyone. Your energy changes when you stop overgiving. Your presence changes when you stop waiting to be validated. Your standards become visible when you no longer accept confusion as closeness. You begin to carry something rare, something strong, something quiet but undeniable. Self-respect. And self-respect has a language people can feel before you even say a word. And once self-respect enters your life, everything starts separating very quickly. People who were only comfortable with your lack of boundaries begin to feel uncomfortable with your growth. People who liked the old version of you, the one who waited, explained, tolerated, and stayed open no matter how little was returned, begin to feel the difference. Not because you became harsh, not because you became bitter, but because you finally stopped offering unlimited access to a heart that deserves to be handled with care. That is when the deepest truth begins to rise inside you. You were never asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person. You were not too emotional. You were simply trying to connect with someone who had not learned how to hold connection in a healthy way. And for a long time, you may have believed the problem was your need for clarity, reassurance, effort, and emotional steadiness. But those are not excessive needs. Those are basic human needs inside any real bond. The problem was never your heart. The problem was where you kept placing it. This is the part where many people finally wake up. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with emotional maturity. They begin to understand that being chosen by someone emotionally distant is not the prize they once thought it was. They begin to understand that attention without stability is a trap. Desire without consistency is a trap. Attraction without emotional safety is a trap. And the longer you stay inside those traps, the more disconnected you become from the kind of love that actually builds peace instead of destroying it. That is why your healing is not about getting the avoidant to finally wake up and love you correctly. Your healing is about waking up yourself. It is about seeing what you used to call hope and realizing much of it was fear in disguise. Fear of starting over, fear of emptiness, fear of admitting that you gave your energy to something that kept taking from you without truly nourishing you. And once you face that fear honestly, you stop being controlled by it. You stop staying where your soul is shrinking. You stop trying to make painful patterns feel meaningful just because you invested so much of yourself into them. There is a powerful moment that happens when you truly begin choosing yourself. You stop needing closure from people who only gave confusion. You stop needing a final explanation from someone whose actions already told the whole story. You stop waiting for them to become who you hope they could be, and instead you begin asking a different question. What kind of life am I creating if I keep giving my best energy to what keeps draining me? That question is not small. That question can save years of your life. Because this is not only about one person. This is about your future. This is about the standards you are building for every relationship after this. This is about whether your life will continue to be shaped by emotional scarcity or whether you will finally create room for something healthier to enter. Every time you stop overextending yourself for the wrong dynamic, you make space for a better one. Every time you stop calling confusion special, you make space for clarity. Every time you stop feeding a bond that keeps starving you, you make space for mutual care. And that is where your real value becomes visible. Not when you are begging to be seen, not when you are trying to prove your worth, but when you are no longer willing to stay where your presence is treated like background noise. Because your value does not increase when someone finally notices it. Your value was always there. The issue is that you kept standing in rooms where it was not being recognized. And when you finally walk away from those rooms, something changes inside you forever. You stop asking for permission to matter. That is the power people feel when someone truly detaches from unhealthy attachment. It is not coldness, it is not ego, it is not pride, it is emotional alignment. It is the moment a person stops betraying their own inner truth just to remain wanted, and that energy is magnetic in a way that chasing can never be. Why? Because people are drawn to those who know their own worth without needing to shout it. People feel the difference between someone who wants to be loved and someone who has learned not to abandon themselves for love. And once you reach that place, the whole story changes. If the avoidant comes back, you no longer see it as a victory. You see it as information. You look at patterns, not promises. You look at consistency, not chemistry. You look at effort, not potential. And that is what growth looks like. Growth is when your heart stops being hypnotized by possibility and starts being guided by reality. Growth is when you no longer melt at small attention from someone who has repeatedly shown emotional limits. Growth is when you can feel desire and still protect your peace. That is the kind of strength most people never build because they stay too long in places that reward self-abandonment. But once you build it, life becomes different. You no longer feel impressed by mixed signals. You no longer feel special just because someone emotionally unavailable suddenly shows interest. You no longer confuse distance with mystery or silence with depth. You begin to crave what is calm, grounded, and honest. And that shift changes everything because your nervous system starts learning that love does not have to feel like pain to feel real. So, if you are standing at that point in your life where you feel yourself changing, where you feel less willing to chase, less willing to overgive, less willing to explain your worth to people who only notice you when you disappear, trust that shift. Do not fear it. Do not run back to what once kept you emotionally hungry just because it feels familiar. Familiar is not always safe. Familiar is not always love. Sometimes familiar is simply the wound repeating itself in a different form. And you were not born to repeat the same pain until it feels normal. You were born to outgrow it. You were born to see clearly. You were born to stop offering your heart where it must constantly fight to be held. Because the moment you truly stop being available to what cannot meet you, you do not become harder to love. You become impossible to misuse.